Welcome to Never Settle. I'm here with Josh and Ben from Foundation Restoration. Thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
So, we just in Metro Detroit recently had a big warm up, big melt. This is probably a fake spring, as we get in Michigan all the
Agreed.
time. It's
Yeah.
going to get cold again. Regardless, spring is coming soon. So, what does that mean for basements and foundations? What should homeowners be looking out for?
Yeah, so obviously we've had all this snow. That snow turns to water, right? And folks that are dealing with leaks that they maybe had, maybe they were smaller leaks last year. That they're coming back, right? That's what it means, really. And sump pumps, right? Oftentimes folks don't inspect their sump pump, and they just assume it works, right? Well, it hasn't been needed for some time, right? And but we're real close to them being needed, right? And so for me, I think it requires taking a look at, re-looking at, your sump pump and or looking at it, looking at around your foundation, making sure things are, your downspout extensions are still attached, right? That the wind and winter didn't detach them, right? I don't know if you got something to add to that, Ben.
No, yeah, that's right where my mind went too. Was nobody pays attention to their sump pump until it quits, right?
Very good point.
Especially if you don't use your basement for anything, why go down there? So it only takes a few minutes to go down there, lift the float switch, make sure that it's running. That might save you a huge headache if you learn that it quit before we've got thousands of gallons of water
Right.
coming in. So that's huge. But then you touched again on the downspouts. If your downspouts aren't buried and they're above ground, there's a good chance that the snow and ice did knock them off. We see that all the time when I'm doing an inspection where they've just fallen off. So now all that roof water is just sitting against your foundation or making its way to your basement, right?
Yeah.
So controlling the water outside and at the surface is the best thing you can do to prevent water getting into the basement, because we always say there's two types of basements: those that leak and those that will.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
everyone eventually leaks. So there's a class of people that know what's coming when we hit spring. They know it's going to be an issue for them, but some people don't. There are if you think that you may have an issue, there are some cheap things you can do, like water alarms. They've got a lot of technology now, like Bluetooth, and you can even incorporate them into your like if you have a home security system or automation or something like that.
That's cool.
Where you get an alert if the water spills out of the sump basin or something to that effect. So just being vigilant, being a good homeowner, I suppose.
Sure. So, with this little melt we've gotten and the bigger ones that are coming, what's like literally happening on the outside of your basement as that snow melts, or we're getting rain? April is obviously, and May, pretty famous for a lot of rain here. What's happening in the soil and around your house, and what is that going to do to your basement?
Yeah, great question. The soil is expansive, right? So the more water that's in that soil, it swells, right? And oftentimes, if the water's not being diverted away and there's a high moisture content in the soil around your house, it exerts a lot of lateral load on your basement wall, right? A lot of pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we'll see where that pressure, that for one reason or another, there was just an abundance of water in one area. That pressure, oftentimes is more than the wall can withstand, right? And you'll see cracking and movement in the wall. Oftentimes, you'll see cracks starting to form and where the wall's starting to be compromised, right? It's starting to move inward because of that pressure, right? And that's why, like, Ben has brought up downspouts. We've talked a great deal about that, because the more water, even with a working waterproofing system, the more water you can divert away from the house that doesn't go through the backfill, right?
Mm-hmm.
The less hydrostatic pressure you have, right? I mean, the best analogy I have, and I've used it for some time, is, imagine putting a pop can in the freezer, right? That can swells and expands, right? And the soil's doing essentially the same thing.
Okay.
Even without freezing, just the hydrostatic pressure, the soil will expand. But if you were to take a knife or poked a hole in the bottom of that pop can, right? You're alleviating that pressure, right? Now that can expand, right? So the more water you divert away, the less expansion you have, and the better your drainage system works, the faster it gets the water out of the soil, and it exerts that additional load on the wall.
Yeah. I mean, to expand on what you're saying there, specifically clay soils are what they consider active soils. They expand and contract. While clay is mostly hydrophobic, it doesn't absorb water, it does eventually. So clay molecules can actually grow up to 3 times their size when they take on water, right? So that's where a lot of the pressure gets created. So if you got all that water sitting over your backfill, snow, ice, once it melts, when that clay absorbs that moisture, the molecules, they need to expand. They need to grow to take on that water. And that's where that pressure, that push gets, is pushed against your basement wall. And if you have a block wall especially, they're highly susceptible to failure. Because, when you think about it, a block wall is, 1,000 individual pieces of stone stacked up
that are hollow,
right? That are hollow on the inside, so it's not that strong. I mean, it's only the mortar. It's really the weight of the house that gives it most of its stability. Whereas that's why most houses today are built with poured concrete. You get a lot more strength out of a solid concrete wall versus hollow block. But even then, we see poured walls that will succumb to the soils, mainly here in southeast Michigan. Right? You get into northern Michigan, it's a lot more sand. It's a totally different animal as far as the foundation problems that you end up dealing with in areas like that. But it's a
we're all clay here. It
Yeah,
seems
all
like
clay.
it's all clay. Few areas of stone where you see the quarries, when you look at geological maps, but for the most part, it's all clay, big lump of clay. And that drives a lot of our foundation damage, a lot of problems. So,
I would say as well that a good portion of the time we're installing anchors or some type of bracing on a wall to stabilize it, it was because of a lack of effort, or lack of knowing even, of getting that water away, or managing that water quickly so that it's not creating that hydrostatic pressure.
Yeah, that's something that we try to communicate to people all the time, because you'll come across this attitude of, it's just a small leak in the corner, it's too expensive, I don't want to fix it, I'll just throw some towels down and I'm not gonna worry about it.
Mops are cheap, right?
Right. But what people don't realize is those processes that are taking place outside, it always turns into more. It turns into a much more expensive problem. It's doing damage, right? Your house wasn't designed to have water leak into the basement. I use the analogy of a car. If your car started making a weird noise one day, and you just ignore it and keep driving it, what's going to happen? Right. It's going to cost you a lot more money by the time you do finally fix it, right? So, the same thing is true with what starts out as a water problem in your basement very often turns into a foundation problem.
Almost always. I think.
Really?
If it goes unchecked, absolutely. That's why it's so important. A lot of people think it's just the nuisance factor of keeping the water out, right? But or even health, but there's a structural reason why we have to drain the water from around these foundations, because of that, because of the soil type where we're at here. If you don't do that, it is absolutely going to be a problem, right? And it all ties together. Something that we talk. Josh talked about the active wedge or the backfilled soil, because of the clay, like what we're talking about here. Essentially, every basement is sitting in a bowl, right? What I mean by that is, when they built your house, they dug a big hole in the ground. That's the first step, right? Dig a big hole. That hole that they dug is larger than your basement, obviously, so they can get in there. They can pour footings, and then they build the walls, right? And once the house is all constructed, they're going to backfill the soil around it, right? Well, now you've got a variation between virgin soil, which has never been disturbed, and your backfilled soil. So what that allows for, that, like I said, that's what creates this bowl effect that we're constantly describing to people. That bowl has to have a drain in the bottom. That's your waterproofing. That's your drainage system. It collects all that water, moves it to a sump so that your sump can pump it away. Even if 50, 100 years later, that bowl still exists. That shape still exists in the soil. That's why maintaining your downspouts and extending them as far as you can is super important, because all the water, if you can take the water and push it out past that bowl, that active wedge, your waterproofing system never has to even deal with it.
Yeah.
Right? So you're extending the life because you're reducing the load, right?
Well, in most drainage systems, the original drainage system, it generally fails due to like erosion. I mean, really, is what it is. So if you can envision, water soaking through that backfilled area, it's taking sand and sediment down to a pipe that's perforated, right? And if you think of it much like an hourglass, right? Like over time, that the more water that runs through there, the faster that soil finds its way, to filling that pipe. And once that pipe's filled, now that clay bowl that we were talking about, there's no way to drain or alleviate the water out of it, right? And so, the idea is the more you divert away from it, the longer lifespan you have on that waterproofing.
That's a good point, because there's only so much water that a waterproofing system will be able to handle throughout its entire life, right? Okay. So the more water you divert, that means just the longer the lifespan of your waterproofing system. Yeah. The way I always describe it is your drain tile system that's buried on the outside. It's an artificial void that we've created in the earth. Mother Nature will take that void back.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
We do everything we can to try to slow it down. We put stone around.
Yeah.
We put sometimes people put filters, which isn't a great idea, but but eventually Mother Nature takes that void back. Now the water has nowhere to go other than into the basement.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. So every drain tile system has a lifespan, like the ones that are buried outside under the dirt, I should say, should clarify, because some of the interior systems that we have available actually aren't compromised by the soil.
Yeah, they're not subject to it.
Yeah, they're not buried in it, so they don't fill up with it. But unfortunately, building code hasn't changed as far as exterior waterproofing. So they're still waterproofing them the same way for the last 80 years.
That's also why a lot of times you'll see houses where your house is only 10 years old and that system's failing. But if you look at the ground around it, it's at the bottom of a hill, right, where all of the water is, from their neighbors' homes and from the street is heading their way. Excuse me, and so you've sped up, that erosion process. Whereas on the flip side of that, you'll see a house where it's up on top of a hill. I've seen old farmhouses that are 150 years old and just started leaking. Right. But you drive up their driveway and everything slopes away, right? So you've really shedded, the bulk of that water.
Absolutely.
And really prolonged the lifespan of that drainage system, right? So
in regards to that, is the grading around your house important? Is
absolutely.
Oh yeah, it all goes hand in hand. I mean, because like we were talking about, with the clay soils, for the most part, if it's graded, a lot of that water will run across the surface, right? But there's still a substantial amount that's going to absorb into the ground. But yeah, those are all things that you can do as a homeowner.
I feel like my house has changed over time. Like the grade right surrounding the house isn't as graded as much, not as much angle.
And that's usually a sign. So like a lot of times, one of the things I would do in my inspection is I'd walk around the house, and oftentimes you see these houses that are 50 or 60 years old, which is about the lifespan of the average drainage system. You'll see where the concrete driveway that runs along the side of the house is cracked and leaning towards the house, right? And that's that erosion. That's that hourglass. The soil that once held that is now found its way down into the pipe.
Right. It ties back to what I was saying. So there was an artificial void there that now got filled with soil. Where did that soil come from?
Yeah, under the driveway.
So that's what's happening around your house. When you see the soil around your house start doing that, where it was graded much better, there's some degree of compaction. it does kind of just compact more over time, but more often than not, it's because it's getting washed and slowly working its way into your that void, that drain tile system. So. Yeah. That's a good indicator. Yeah, when you see things starting to change like that, the soil dropping around your house, it's a red flag, I should say.
Sure.
That doesn't necessarily mean you have a problem, but something to check, something to look for.
Yeah, and then let's say you do have a negative grade around your house, Nick, and what I would recommend is adding soil to it. Right, the more you could divert the water from that area, you're slowing that area down. Yeah. Right, when water's puddling there, well, you're speeding it up. Right, so you don't want puddles around the house, right? You just don't.
So as spring's coming and that melt is happening, it's not just a water issue that I could see. That's when you're potentially going to see foundation issues. If you've had water before, more than likely. Or
Yeah,
no?
yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't know if you want to answer that, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, foundation. What's the the tricky thing about clay is that it causes damage throughout the year, whether it's wet or dry. But to your point, when it's really wet, when we see the spring melt, then the soil tends to get oversaturated. That's when we get the expansion of the clay. When we see the expansion of the soil, that's when we'll get more calls for buckling walls, bowing. We see lateral movement in the foundation because everything's swelling up and it's pushing on the foundation walls. On the flip side, when it gets really dry, like in the summer, the exact opposite happens to the clay. It shrinks, right? So if now your foundation, your footing is sitting on clay, and that clay soil shrinks underneath it, what happens to the house?
Yeah, it settles.
Moves.
Yeah, it drops right down. So we see a lot more vertical movement when it's really dry, and much more lateral movement when it's wet. So, yeah, looking for cracks. If you have a block wall, they break the same way I would say 99% of the time. If you step back and look at the entire wall, there'll be a horizontal crack that's just below ground level, and then as it gets to the corners, it'll stair step up and stair step down. It makes like a big X on the wall. That's, I guess, it keeps but yeah, so I mean, those are some things you can look for: is stair steps near the corners, and that big horizontal crack along the just about where the ground would be on the outside.
So that's not just cosmetic. If I see cracks,
Right.
it's not like, oh, the mortar's old and it just cracked.
Yeah,
That's not the
generally
case.
not with block walls. Last week we talked about shrinkage cracks in poured walls. You can have some cracks in a poured wall that aren't really alarming, right? It's just normal. Concrete has no elasticity, but it just depends, right? If the cracks are running lateral down a poured wall, that's a cause for concern, right?
Okay.
If the cracks are opening, or if you notice the bottom of the crack is tight but the top is open significantly more than the bottom, it's telling you have something happening, right? But just a straight up and down vertical crack, it's more often than not just a water nuisance, right? The path of least resistance. The water can now find its way through. I'd add to your previous question too. There's been a number of times where I've gone down in a basement where the wall is just leaking severely. There's no structural damage, but essentially what you've done is that water pressure has found an easy way through the wall, and so it's not building up outside, right? And then the flip side of that is I've seen walls where there's no sign of water really, but the wall's cracking and collapsing or compromised, and so it's kind of hard to relate where you're at in that, right? If you see water, sometimes it's not, oh my goodness, we need tons of work, but dealing with the water is important.
Sure.
Right.
But what you just, sorry to cut you off there. I mean, but what you just said ties into why you would want to call somebody like us out.
Yeah.
Right. At that point, if you're seeing these things and you're unsure, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a huge problem, but you could have a huge problem. You need to know, right?
Right.
So, and the only way you're going to know is somebody doing a detailed, inspection, measuring the wall with a laser to see if there's any variation, if there's any deviation. There are a ton of different types of cracks in poured walls. The hairline is kind of like the least alarming, and a hairline crack is, you can see there's a crack there, but there's no real movement. It doesn't look like there's any separation. There's no deviation on either side. So it's not necessarily as much of a concern. He talked about the V-shaped cracks where they're tight at the bottom, wide at the top. That can only happen if one section moved one way or the other, right? Another thing to look for is a difference in the plane, right? So if you got a crack in the wall, if you run your hand across it and this side over here is sticking out
offset.
an 1/8 inch further, right?
Yeah.
Moving
that
in.
tells you that something's tipping in. Poured walls will typically tip, just like we're saying, whereas a block wall will kind of break in the middle and fold in half.
Buckle.
A poured wall, because it's solid concrete, you'll get these shears at the corners, and then the entire wall will just tip, coming towards you. So there are some things that I look for that you can, if you look up at the sill plate, where it transitions to wood, right, where it sits on top of your foundation. If you look at the corner, how is that aligned? How does the edge of the block or the poured wall align with the sill plate? Then look in the center, right? Sometimes you can see that wall. If I look at it in the center, it's an inch further. They don't line up the same. So little things like that you can look for. It is hard if you're not trained in this stuff, to really pick up on it. But
that's the whole reason for the free inspection,
right?
I mean, it's to get a professional to take a look at it and make sure that whether you do or do not have a problem, it's ideal to know, right? And what if the problem is a small problem that you fix this, it's not going to cost you a ton of money, but it avoids you spending a ton of money later because you didn't know.
That's my next question was, okay, I see a problem. I know I've got something happening. It's kind of scary. Like,
absolutely,
it's scary that I don't want anything happening to my house, but making that call is a little scary. Like, this is going to be really expensive. Is this something I can put off? Maybe it won't balloon and become a bigger issue.
Yeah.
Is that a good idea?
It's human nature. I think a lot of people think like that. My thoughts and just experience of seeing that exact thing, same thing take place, is oftentimes just fixing this little small problem, right? Ben's analogy with the car, right?
Yeah.
When you start hearing your brakes grind, brakes are pretty inexpensive, right? You let it go, and now you need rotors and calipers, right? Yeah. And I think that snowball effect could definitely happen. And I think oftentimes people are surprised, at some of the costs of this. Like it's not always a ton of money to make the repair, right? Mm-hmm. Some little leaks or even like a wall bowing where it just looks horrible, and you put this number in your head as to what that it's going to look like. And then we come out and it's a third of that cost to actually fix it, whereas you wait and that wall either collapses or it worsens and it can't be repaired. With one of these two methods now that are less expensive, right?
Well, what's unfortunate is that along what he's saying is that we're seeing a lot more of these big corporate entities that they don't even tell people that there is a lesser option. Right. So that I understand that apprehension, that feeling like I know this is going to cost a lot if I call somebody out here. That's why we actually come across now people that are shocked that we can just waterproof this wall. We can just fix this one area here because they weren't told that. They were told that, oh yeah, we got to rip your whole basement apart. We got to do all the. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of times it might be the best thing to do if you're thinking long term, right? Like, okay, this wall had a problem. We should just go ahead and nip it in the bud and fix the whole basement. That's great if somebody's in a position to do that. Mm-hmm. But not everybody is, right? I mean, this is tough times for a lot of people. So, giving them different options and different ways to tackle it more economically is something that I'm glad that we're able to do. Yeah. Because unfortunately, I'm seeing a big, that the industry, other guys they're just pretending it doesn't even exist. Right, because they'd rather sell them a $40,000 repair, than a $4,000 repair.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I would add too that let's say that full basement, we look at it and feel that hey, this is necessary, right, to do. We offer a ton of different finance options. We offer a ton of different ways to really help with that matter, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm definitely interested in that because if I've got the problem, I'm a little apprehensive to call, but I can call. I can get a free inspection. So that sounds great. Then the bill comes. Great, but I can't afford it right now. Yeah. So what can I do? Do I just put it off and hope it doesn't get worse?
Yeah, I mean, once again, we offer financing, but there's an array of different plans. There's that fit just about any budget, right? I mean, whether it's long term or interest-free financing, different things that really make this very easy to take care of.
Yeah.
Right.
And when people say they can't afford it, I feel like that's all in how you look at it, right? Because you say you can't afford to do this repair now, which a lot of times we can help make it affordable for you. You know what I mean? We can offer different financing plans and things like that. But when you let the problem go and you do nothing, it gets 10 times more expensive, right? So I would say you can't afford not to do it.
Yeah. Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Because you're going to cost yourself 10 times more if you don't.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of this too, I mean, your house is generally your most expensive investment, right? I mean, it costs more than my vehicle. It costs more than get my kids through college. I mean, it's an expensive, it's
Asset.
Yeah, it's your
it
largest
is.
investment
Expensive
for
asset.
most people. Yeah, it's their largest investment.
Right, and to not protect it, right? I mean, we carry homeowners insurance, right, for if we have a problem with our roof, but the idea of not protecting that, right, and you know, oftentimes, you know, if we can and come in and the problem isn't large and it's something you can afford without financing, that, you know, that's great. But if the problem is larger, right, or it does need more attention, you know, I feel the financing makes that you know, possible for a lot of people.
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's great.
And
I can generally hit, you know, somebody's budget, you know, because we've got terms that go out to 20 years. I mean,
Wow.
so if you've got a major project that needs to be done, we can usually break it up and make it affordable. You know, something that will fit within your budget. So
That's great. So to wrap it up, spring's coming.
Yep.
Give me 3, 4, 5 things to look for and that I should be doing as a homeowner right now just to make sure I'm good.
So, I mean, sump pump is number one. If you have a basement, check your sump pump. Actually, open it up, lift the float, make sure it turns on.
What should I be looking for lifespan? When should I be starting to really get concerned about, like, maybe I need to replace?
Like replacing the pump.
Yeah.
Yeah. That actually varies quite a bit depending on what style and manufacturer you have. But I think a good rule of thumb is if it's older than 5 years old, it's you know, it's in that window where it could be a problem. Now, I've seen sump pumps that ran for 15 years, but I've also seen them fail after 5. You know?
Sure.
So, yeah, if it's the pump itself is older than 5 years old, there's a question mark there as to how much longer, you know, it will keep functioning. Let's see. Yeah, checking your discharge, you know, along those same lines. Make sure that your discharge is
Free
open,
flowing.
clear, free flowing.
Yeah.
You know, most discharges, any modern discharge, where it comes out of the house, it's going to have what's called a freeze blow off, right? There's a relief there. If there's water coming out of that actually means there's a problem, right? So that's only there as a safety feature, so that if the actual discharge line becomes clogged or blocked or frozen, that way it can still eject the water out of the basement, but it's ejecting it right next to the foundation, which is less than ideal,
Sure.
right? But that is better than the alternative, which would be the line blowing apart and spraying water all over your basement, right? So, yeah, checking your discharge.
Downspouts.
Yeah, then downspouts.
Downspouts would probably be, you know, the next thing you could do to, you know.
Yeah, I'd say grading, downspouts, checking your pump motor. Those would, as a homeowner, those are probably the 3 best things you can do to protect yourself. Consider, you know, some type of alarm, you know, like notification. Like you said, that's.
Yeah, nowadays they're cheap. I mean, you can get a sump alarm, right? And you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
My sister, her she didn't have a sump alarm, which is yeah.
She know what you do?
Yeah, and but it cost her a hot water tank. The sump failed and it flooded her basement, and luckily she didn't have a lot down there, but the hot water tank was ruined, right? And you know, so 100% avoidable, and you know, I'm kind of kicking myself because
Right.
you know, I should have helped her, but she does now.
That's good.
She does now.
And we've had a pretty harsh winter as
Yeah.
far as temperatures and snow, so that's going to have potential impact on your downspouts and those kinds of things, I would think.
New cracks. Looking for new cracks. You know what you just said there. With a harsh winter like we just had, it's you know, we saw a deeper freeze than we have in probably almost 10 years. It got really cold there for a long snap. You know, to what Josh was talking about earlier with that, there is a freeze effect as well. If the ground is saturated and it freezes, that can create pressure on the foundation and cause damage. So there are going to be some people coming out of this winter that have leaks that never did before.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because of what happened, because of the conditions that we just went through. So,
I would add too, like with cinder block walls, right? You know, oftentimes you'll see at the bottom of the wall where it looks discolored, right? And it looks, oftentimes people think they're getting mold or something, you know, because they see some type of growth on it, which in most cases it's not mold, it's efflorescence, which is like a sediment coming out of the block.
Mm-hmm.
But that's usually a pretty good indicator that water is seeping through it, right? So it might not show up in a puddle just yet. But, you know, if you go, you know, what I would suggest is walk the perimeter of your basement, right? Look at the walls, for cracks like Ben suggested, and then look at, you know, are you seeing any discoloration around the bottom? Because, you know, if you are, there's a reason, right? And what is that reason, right? And I would look into that a little further, right?
Great. Well, thanks, guys. This is a lot of good tips for homeowners to
Yeah.
check out as the weather warms up. So make sure you're doing those things. Appreciate your time, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.